Charles Fraser. Death Who Knows Many Paths. The Adventures of the Elderly Sherlock Holmes. Episode 9. Based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go audio production. I heard quiet voices but couldn't place them. Darkness. I felt my feet aching and tingling, starting from the toes, across the heels, up the legs. The same with my hands. My fingertips hurt as if they had been trapped for an eternity or frozen once at Arctic temperatures. Hold on. I believe that was actually true. Suddenly my memory returned and mortal fear coursed through my body. A violent tremor ran through me, and a pitiful cry escaped my parched throat. I felt hands on my shoulders, gently but firmly pressing me down. "Everything is all right, old chap. You're safe." Holmes! It was Holmes! I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt as heavy as lead. I had to gather my strength, and it took every ounce of concentration to demand this simple movement from my body. At last, I made out the blurry figure of my friend, who was still holding my shoulders and leaning over me. "Holmes," I croaked. "What happened? Where am I?" "You're in hospital, and you'll be back on your feet, if one can even make such claims at our age. That's all you need to know for now. We'll have plenty of time to discuss everything. Try to get some more sleep and recover, old friend." Another hand suddenly grasped mine and I startled in fright. "It's me, Alice. Everything is fine, Dr. Watson." Alice? I hadn't noticed her at all, but it gave me a good feeling to know she was by Holmes's side, and now by mine as well. "Pain," I croaked again. "My legs, my fingers." I tried to demonstrate by extending my hands towards the two of them, but I had already expended all my strength just opening my eyes. I gave up and tried not to tense up. Holmes beckoned for a nurse. Meanwhile, my eyelids grew heavy again, and soon I could no longer keep them open. I heard someone else approach my bed. It must have been the nurse or a doctor. I heard Holmes speaking quietly. I couldn't make out exactly what was said. Then I felt a prick. Immediately afterwards, warmth spread throughout my battered body. The pain began to subside, and my consciousness started to fade. 3 days later, I was feeling considerably better. I had completely recovered from my dehydration in the meantime, though the frostbite was still causing me trouble. With thickly bandaged feet and hands, I received my daily visitor Holmes while sitting in a wheelchair. "I was right after all," Holmes quipped. "That at our age, one doesn't get back on one's feet so quickly, but at least you're sitting up today, even if it is in a wheelchair." "I am glad to still be among the living, and that is entirely thanks to you. I owe you one." "Again," I said humbly to my friend. "Oh, come now, Watson, don't get all sentimental. You're a resilient chap. You've proven that time and time again, and I must admit, I owe my life to you on more than one occasion. We're partners, and apparently rather difficult to kill off." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. In the end, I opted for the former. "Shall I wheel you around for a bit?" asked Holmes. "I mean, so you can see something other than this dreary room." "But don't let Alice hear you say that," I remarked pointedly. "She's really gone to great lengths with all the flowers and the get-well cards from the children." "A hospital room remains a hospital room," Holmes stated firmly with his deep-seated aversion to such places. "No amount of greenery can change that. Unless, of course, said greenery were suitable for smoking. Then we'd be looking at quite a different situation altogether." And with that, Holmes pushed me out the door and along the long corridor. "How are your frostbite injuries coming along?" Holmes inquired. "Tomorrow they'll remove my bandages, but I don't have much hope. During last night's dressing change, a blue-black discoloration was already visible on some toes and 2 fingers. That indicates 3rd or 4th degree frostbite. In the worst case, they'll have to amputate the dead limbs. Then, I suppose, you'd have to wheel me about in the wheelchair more often in future. It would be my honour to chauffeur you, especially since I could then do without my walking stick. But stay positive, Watson. After all, that's what you always told your patients. Let's not assume the worst." "You're right, Holmes," I replied quietly and without much confidence. She tried to kill me, the beast! Suddenly came a shout from the main corridor. A man was being hastily wheeled into A&E on a bed. He was writhing in pain, clutching his stomach, screaming, cursing and swearing terribly. Holmes had stopped. I turned my head towards him, seeking his gaze questioningly. "No, no," he said, wagging his index finger. "That's not our concern, and your recovery takes absolute priority." Thus, Holmes resumed pushing my wheelchair and steered me towards the hospital's cafeteria. When Holmes visited me the next day, he was quite astonished to find someone had already taken a seat on a chair beside my bed. "You're the man from yesterday who called his wife a beast and was poisoned? Rat poison, I assume?" "How do you know that?" asked the man, irritated. "Your remark, 'the beast,' points to a female perpetrator. You don't look like someone who would employ servants. Therefore, I deduce it was either your wife, girlfriend, or mistress. Revenge is usually carried out by the wife, and as for the rat poison, I can smell your garlic breath from here, which clearly indicates arsenic abuse. But now, a question from me. Who are you? What are you doing here? And what do you want?" Holmes asked angrily. And I knew perfectly well that my friend could answer questions 2 and 3 himself, and was only reacting so grumpily because my state of health was his top priority. "My name is Jeremy Walters," replied the man, "and I implore you to prove the murder attempt that my wife committed against me." "What makes you think we're even capable of doing that?" Holmes wanted to know through gritted teeth. "I overheard a conversation between the nurse and another nurse, in which she said that the most famous detective duo was currently coming and going in this building. And upon my further inquiry, the nurse told me that Dr. Watson himself was a patient here." Holmes shook his head vigorously, but before he could refuse, I made myself heard. "Well, from my medical perspective, there's nothing preventing us from taking the case. There can be absolutely no talk of we. After all, you are still an inpatient and need to recover," Holmes stated indignantly. As if to prove my point, I swung my legs out of bed. Although swung might not be quite the right word. Rather hesitantly, bit by bit, I managed to move my legs out of bed and place them on the floor. Then I reached for a walking stick and winked conspiratorially at Holmes. "You see, Holmes?" I ceremoniously waved my newly acquired walking stick through the air. "What do you say now?" I shifted my weight onto the stick, stood up, and took a few steps towards Holmes. "Moreover, I can tell you that I'm being discharged today. To my great fortune, immediate amputation of my frostbitten limbs is not necessary at this time." Satisfied and happy, I tossed my walking stick in the air to catch it again. Unfortunately, my cockiness did not serve me well. I began to wobble and was about to fall, had Holmes not caught me at the last moment and helped me back to an upright position. Now, he immediately scolded me. "Pride comes before a fall, old friend." After ensuring I was steady on my feet again, he turned to the almost forgotten Jeremy Walters and said in a conciliatory tone, "Please give me your address, just in case. I shall discuss the matter further with my partner Dr. Watson at home and contact you if necessary." Jeremy Walters took a piece of paper and a pen from the table that was kept ready in every hospital room, scribbled down his address, and handed the slip of paper to Holmes. He thanked us politely, gave me an extra nod of farewell, and left. "Why are you so keen on helping this Walters fellow?" Holmes asked me peevishly. I hesitated briefly before answering. I can't quite put my finger on it, but something about him seems familiar. Moreover, I find him extremely likeable, and he has a rather pleasant demeanour. "Do you think so?" Holmes intoned and continued sarcastically. "A man reeking of garlic, plagued by diarrhea and vomiting, and who insults his wife by calling her a beast. You find him extremely likeable and pleasant in appearance. Most interesting, Watson, most interesting." I raised both eyebrows, firmly grasped my walking stick again, and lightly tapped it against Holmes's cane. "Come now, Holmes, let's finally head home." 5 days later, Holmes and I stood in front of Jeremy Walters's small, unadorned cottage, which was just a short carriage ride away from Baker Street. It took considerable persuasion on my part to convince Holmes to visit Jeremy Walters. Holmes remained steadfastly concerned about my health condition until yesterday, when I was finally able to remove the light bandages from my feet, and by now I was moving more swiftly with my walking stick than Holmes himself. "Come along now, Holmes," I called out encouragingly and knocked loudly on the front door. After a few moments, the door was opened by an attractive red-headed woman in her late 30s. "Yes, may I help you?" she said, scrutinising Holmes and myself without restraint. "Are you Mrs Walters?" asked Holmes politely. "My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is my friend and partner, Dr. Watson. We would like to speak with your husband, Jeremy Walters." A contemptuous look appeared on Mrs Walters's face. "The two super detectives who are supposed to expose me as a murderous beast. I've already heard about you." She smiled smugly whilst opening the door to let us in. "Jeremy, you've got visitors!" she shouted into the rooms, left us standing there without another word, and disappeared. Holmes and I exchanged a brief glance, but then Jeremy Walters appeared. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I'm delighted you're here. Please follow me to the sitting room where we can have a quiet chat." The Walters' living room was quite cosily furnished. A fire burned in the fireplace, which naturally gave the room a homely ambience. "May I offer you tea and biscuits, or would you prefer a scotch?" Mr. Walters asked us. Before Holmes could answer, I said, "Tea would be absolutely splendid. Thank you very much." Jeremy Walters excused himself for a moment and disappeared into the kitchen. "What do you make of his wife?" I whispered to Holmes, mindful of any unwanted listeners. "Well, she seems to be quite a spirited character." But suddenly we heard an agonising scream. It had to be Mr. Walters. Holmes and I quickly rushed to his aid in the kitchen. The teapot lay spilt on the floor, while Walters clutched his scalding red hand and, with a face contorted in pain, berated his wife. "You cunning witch! Are you trying to burn me? Not content with simply killing me any more? No, you'd rather play the torturer first." His wife rolled her eyes in exasperation, took his burnt hand, and plunged it into a bowl filled with cold water. Jeremy Walters cried out again, and for a brief moment I wasn't sure whether the water bowl really contained cold rather than hot water. But then Walters' face relaxed and showed signs of relief. I went over to Walters, pulled his hand out of the water bowl and examined it. The burns weren't particularly serious, so I advised him, "Just put a loose bandage around it and keep the wound dry. Don't apply any home remedies like flour, powder or oil. That would severely impair the healing process, or rather, it would be counterproductive, and you could end up with a nasty infection." "Thank you, doctor," Walters mumbled meekly. His wife handed him a dry, clean cloth which served as a temporary bandage. "Now you've witnessed it yourself," Mr. Walters suddenly burst out, quickly regaining his old form. "My wife is trying to kill me." "The only thing I witnessed was your shouting. What do you say we all four sit down in the living room and each of you tells me your side of the story?" Mr. and Mrs. Walters raised no objection, so we followed Holmes back into the living room and took our seats. "Mr. Walters," Holmes spoke again, "please tell me what happened." "This mad woman intended to scald me and watch me die slowly and agonisingly." I cleared my throat loudly and admonished Jeremy Walters. Could we perhaps have a little less drama? I reached for the whistling kettle that my wife had already put on. "But that was rather kind of her," I interrupted Mr. Walters, earning piercing looks from both him and Holmes. "So I reached for the kettle," Walters began again, "when my wife made sure to be quicker than me and immediately doused me with it." "But that's not true at all," Mrs. Walters interjected energetically. "I merely wanted to help you. We both know how clumsy you are, which you've rather impressively proven once again." "How did the incident unfold from your perspective?" Holmes pressed. "I reached for the kettle at exactly the same moment as my husband. Neither of us got a proper grip on it. The kettle slipped from our hands, tipped over, and unfortunately, the hot water poured straight over my husband's hand. That's what you call bad luck and nothing else." But Holmes persisted. And what explanation do you have for the poisoning your husband suffered and had to be treated for in hospital? If one is such a glutton and can't even leave the bacon bait in the mousetrap alone, what else am I supposed to say about that? She explained stubbornly. I believe I have heard enough, Holmes concluded and stood up. Get well soon for your hand, Mr. Walters. Watson, shall we? But Holmes, I tried to persuade him, don't you think we should perhaps conduct further interviews? But Holmes had already gone through the door. Just 2 days later, Mr. Walters visited us for the first time at Baker Street. He wore a thick woolen scarf around his neck, which he wasn't willing to remove even after he had long since shed his winter coat and taken a seat in our living room. Mr. Walters, what brings you to us? Asked Holmes, rather bored. Jeremy Walters fidgeted nervously in his seat and fiddled awkwardly with his row of buttons. It's not entirely easy for me to talk about this, but I simply don't know who else I could turn to, he began hesitantly. Come on, out with it, I encouraged him. We've been doing this for many long years and have heard quite a lot during that time. You can believe me. But Walters still wouldn't come out with it. Holmes had had enough. Mr. Walters, you either get to the point or stop wasting our time. We haven't got much of it left to spare, so… Haltingly, Walters removed his scarf, revealing bluish strangulation marks. But how on earth did that happen? I asked excitedly. Walters did not answer, but instead began nervously fiddling with his row of buttons again. Mr. Walters, Holmes interjected. Time is of the essence, you understand. Quietly, Jeremy finally began to tell his story. When you both left us the day before yesterday, I decided to give my wife another chance and reconciled with her. I thought that perhaps I was completely wrong about my accusations. Walters paused for what Holmes considered far too long. You've reconciled. How lovely for you. Best of luck for the future. Goodbye. No, wait, Walters pleaded. She tried it again, as you can see. To kill me, I mean. Go on, Holmes urged him. Well, we were in the process of reconciling. Physically, if you catch my drift. Holmes nodded impassively, whilst Walters's cheeks turned red. Eliza, my wife, suddenly had this idea with the silk scarf. At first, I found it quite stimulating, but when she pulled the cloth tighter and tighter around my neck, and I slowly began to feel dizzy, the stimulation quickly faded. But she pulled even tighter until I finally lost consciousness. By now, Mr. Walters's head bore more resemblance to a baboon's bottom, and he gazed at the floor in shame. So how did the story continue? I mean, you must have managed to free yourself from this hopeless situation. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here now. When I regained consciousness, I found myself staring directly into my neighbour's eyes. Oh my goodness, I interjected with amusement. How did that come about? I'm not entirely sure, Walters tried to explain. After my first glance fell upon my neighbour, my second glance went to my still exposed private parts. So I hastily covered myself with the blanket, gathered my clothes, and left the room without another word. I immediately got dressed and left the house. Then I wandered aimlessly around the area for several hours, trying to collect my thoughts. When I finally returned home, thankfully my neighbour was gone, but so was my spiteful wife. I'm certain my wife is having a secret affair with the neighbour, and they're now plotting together to kill me. That's absurd, Holmes assessed the situation. If that were the case, your neighbour and your wife would have killed you when you were unconscious. They'll never get a better opportunity than that. To me, it sounds as though your neighbour saved you. So now you also believe that Eliza wants to kill me? I did not say that, Holmes replied. But I have a suggestion. Dr. Watson and I will take you back home to your wife and we shall speak with her again. Jeremy Walters gratefully accepted, even though the thought of another encounter with his wife visibly unsettled him. When Jeremy Walters, Holmes and I were once again standing in front of the plain little house a short while later, Eliza Walters came running towards us. There you are at last, she exclaimed with delight. I've been so worried about you. Mr. Walters raised both arms defensively and cried out in fear, Don't you dare come near me! Now, Holmes appeased. Let's all go inside first and then continue our discussion. In the house, Eliza Walters led us into the living room, and before she had the chance to offer us anything, Holmes already proclaimed, "I would say we shall wisely forgo the tea and get straight to the point. Mrs. Walters, could you please explain to me, from your perspective, how this extremely delicate situation came about?" Not in the least bit embarrassed, she asked cheekily, "You mean our reconciliatory act of love?" "If that's how you wish to express it," Holmes retorted. My husband and I had another chat, and he too had to realise that it was absolute nonsense to think I wanted him dead. Well, one thing led to another. We started kissing and caressing, began undressing each other. "Thank you. I can already picture how that came about. I meant how you ended up in the situation where you nearly strangled your husband." "That's exactly what I'm trying to explain to you. I have this book from my best friend." "Best friend?" Jeremy Walters cried out in horror. "She's a witch. Satan's sister, perhaps, but certainly not a harmless friend." Holmes gestured to Mr. Walters to please remain calm and allow his wife to continue with her explanation. The book is called The Most Extraordinary Seduction Tricks of Modern Times, and in this book there's something about a practice involving a silk scarf that one gently wraps around the man's neck, and the more aroused the man becomes, the tighter one pulls the scarf. Do you understand? During these vulgar explanations, I looked at the floor in embarrassment, searching for overlooked specks of dust on the spotless surface. Holmes cleared his throat. "I'm not quite sure if I'm following you correctly, but whilst you were applying your extraordinary seduction technique, did you not notice that your husband was suffocating, or rather, had already lost consciousness?" "Of course I noticed that." "When exactly?" Holmes wanted to know. Eliza Walters glared at Holmes. "When I was about to reach my climax, but there was no longer any response from my Jeremy. I inwardly cursed Holmes for his insufferable habit of wanting to uncover every minute detail in any given situation as thoroughly as possible. In my opinion, there were times when it would be wiser not to question and know everything, and this was precisely such a moment. While I was so embarrassed that I didn't know where to look anymore, Holmes remained as composed as ever, as if he were merely chatting with Eliza Walters about the weather. "What happened next?" asked Holmes. "When I discovered that Jeremy had lost consciousness, I started shaking him. At that very moment, there was a knock at the door downstairs. At first, I ignored the knocking, but then I thought whoever it was might be able to help me. So I decided to leave Jeremy alone briefly to see who was at the door. It was John Myers, our neighbour. Without hesitation, I pulled him behind me up to our bedroom. Mr. Myers immediately bent over Jeremy and slapped him on both cheeks to try to wake him up. And indeed, a few moments later, my husband opened his eyes again. "And what happened next?" Holmes pressed on. "That fool jumped up as if stung by a bee and ran out of the house. I haven't set eyes on him since. I had already imagined the most dreadful scenarios of what might have happened to him," said Eliza Walters, anxiously burying her face in her hands. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," Jeremy Walters shouted angrily. "If something unfortunate were to happen to me, that would suit you just fine. You wouldn't have to do the dirty work yourself." Eliza reached out her hands towards her husband, but he brushed them aside dismissively. "Where do you get such ideas from? What would I gain from your death? I love you." "I would also like to know that," Holmes chimed in. "Is there any wealth in your family? Jeremy, do you have life insurance? Other riches?" "Oh, just look around," said Jeremy, gesturing around the room. "We're not wealthy. We get by, but that's about it. No, I bet she's having an affair." "I'm not having an affair. What would I gain from your death? If that were the case, I could simply leave." "I think you both need to calm down now," said Holmes to the Walters, then continued, "and the two of us, Watson, should be on our way." "And what am I supposed to do? Surely you're not going to leave me here alone with this potential murderess?" Jeremy Walters asked anxiously. "Yes, that's exactly what we intended," Holmes replied laconically. "But perhaps you'd like to reconcile instead. This time, though, I would recommend leaving the handkerchiefs aside." Holmes gave Walters a quick wink, and we took our leave. Once we were outside, I asked Holmes, "Do you really feel comfortable leaving those two alone? Watson, Eliza and Jeremy are married. He says she wants to kill him. She denies everything and claims she loves him. I cannot see any motive here." "So you believe Eliza Walters and consider her innocent? And you think the incidents that befell Jeremy Walters were truly accidents?" "I did not say that," said Holmes, striding briskly forward with the aid of his walking stick. "What do you mean by that, Holmes?" I wanted to know curiously and limped quickly after my friend, but he had already reached the street and was looking out for a carriage. I knew all too well that I wouldn't learn anything more from Holmes at this point. Having arrived home in Baker Street, I removed my things while Holmes, still fully dressed, hurried to his room. I had already made myself comfortable in my favourite armchair when Holmes suddenly emerged from his chamber and said, "I must go out again. It might take rather a while. Don't worry about me." Of course, I immediately jumped up and wanted to accompany him, but Holmes held me back. "No, my good man, you're staying here." "Let me come with you," I protested. "What am I supposed to do here all alone?" "I would have a few ideas," said Holmes. "Water the potted plant. It's in dire need. The crossword in today's Times remains unsolved. Or you could help Mrs Hudson with the 3 children, or perhaps conduct a check-up on someone. I'm sure you'll think of something." And with that, he was gone. I stood alone in the middle of the room and looked around dejectedly. Then I spotted our houseplant. Could it still be saved with a bit of watering? Evening came. Night fell, and night gave way to morning. No sign of Holmes. I started to worry. This was exactly what he had told me not to do. But after all, he had been gone all night. I hoped nothing had happened to him. Suddenly, there was a violent knock at our door. I rushed to open it quickly. But instead of Holmes as I'd hoped, and why would Holmes knock anyway, it immediately occurred to me, Jeremy Walters was standing there. His face was contorted with pain and fear. He held his right arm tightly pressed against his body. When I took his coat from his shoulders, I immediately understood why. His right arm was splintered and heavily bandaged. "Mr. Walters, what on earth has happened to you?" I wanted to know. "Eliza," she tried it again. "She probably wanted me to break my neck." "Did she push you down the stairs?" He gave a tortured laugh. "No, much more devious. She completely iced over the path by the back entrance. She probably spent hours last night lugging buckets of water and pouring them out there. Assuming that's what happened, how could she have known that you would slip right there of all places?" "That's not exactly rocket science," Jeremy laughed painfully. "Every morning after getting up, I make myself a cup of coffee and go through the back door for a walk around our house. Only then do I sit down on the bench right next to the back door to drink my coffee. That's my early morning ritual." I thoughtfully scratched my chin. Were they really just unfortunate coincidences plaguing Mr. Walters, or was his wife truly targeting him deliberately? But it was early February, when paths often became icy. Perhaps meltwater from the roof had run onto the path during the night. It was enough to make one tear one's hair out. There was always a but or an explanation. "Dr. Watson, I'm frightened, terribly frightened, of my wife, of everyday life. I've no idea when it'll strike me again, and it could happen anywhere, at any time." Jeremy Walters lamented, snapping me out of my thoughts. "I understand you completely." I tried to calm him down, but he paced nervously around the room. "Where is Mr. Holmes, actually?" he asked at last. "Here I am," it sounded behind me. "What has happened to you this time?" he asked Jeremy Walters directly. Mr. Walters explained everything to Holmes. "Well, that's almost a relief then. I thought you two had actually reconciled yesterday, and I was already imagining scenarios of how you might have ended up with that broken hand." "Holmes!" I exclaimed indignantly. He merely shrugged his shoulders innocently. "And where the devil were you anyway?" I scolded. "You'll find out soon enough. Mr. Walters, would it be all right if we accompanied you home to your wife? Was your absence related to me? So you do believe me now? Can you have my wife arrested straight away?" Jeremy Walters asked Holmes all at once without pausing for breath. Yes, yes, no, replied Holmes. But come along now. There are a few things I would like to ask your wife. However, today the plain little house didn't seem as quiet as during our 2 previous visits. A carriage and 2 motor cars were parked in front of the cottage. Through the window, several people could be seen. What in heaven's name is going on here? I asked Jeremy Walters indignantly. He slapped his uninjured left hand against his forehead before answering. My birthday! I'm turning 40 today. Many happy returns, said Holmes emotionlessly and observed matter-of-factly. Looks like it's going to be quite a wild party. What do you want to do now, Holmes? I asked. Do you want to pull Eliza Walters away from her party guests and interrogate her? Or what's the plan? My friend raised his eyebrows in bewilderment. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I'm very grateful for bringing me back and for your efforts. But could we postpone the questioning until tomorrow morning? I'd rather not right now, with all these people. I'm sure you understand. My instinct tells me that's not a good idea, said Holmes thoughtfully. Do you have any solid evidence against my wife? Jeremy Walters inquired. No, I do not. Only circumstantial evidence, Holmes admitted. Very well. I shall mingle with my guests, try not to think about Eliza, and spend the night at a hotel. She can hardly kill me in front of all these people. And tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'll meet her at Baker Street, and we'll drive back here together. And you, Mr. Holmes, will speak with Eliza. Would that suit you? That sounds like a plan, I said, shaking Jeremy Walters' hand goodbye and wishing him a happy birthday. He's not coming, I said through gritted teeth, as our living room clock already showed 10:15 the next morning. I can see that too, Holmes replied. I do hope nothing's happened to him. I was very nervous and genuinely worried about Jeremy Walters. He was more than frightened yesterday, and I'm beginning to think he had good reason to be. Don't be such a doom-monger, said Holmes. Come along, Watson. Let's head out on our own. Perhaps something simply came up, or there's a logical explanation. After all, the man celebrated his 40th birthday yesterday and probably had one too many. It's just a shame we didn't ask which hotel he intended to stay at last night. And what if Mr. Walters shows up here in the meantime? I asked. We'll leave a message with Alice for him just in case. Now come along, Watson. When we finally stood in front of the Walters house for the 4th time, my knees went weak. A massive commotion of police officers was swarming around the little cottage. That's not a good sign, Holmes. We're too late. I'm afraid you're right, Holmes replied tonelessly. We ducked under the police tape and immediately encountered a familiar officer who greeted us straight away. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I had no idea Inspector Wolford had requested you. Inspector Wolford, said Holmes, is he in the house? Yes, sir. He's attending to the grieving widow, the officer stated. He is dead, it struck me, but Holmes pushed me onwards towards the entrance of the house. Inside, Eliza Walters sat huddled in an armchair, holding a cup of tea. Inspector Wolford sat opposite her, trying simultaneously to calm her and encourage her to speak. When he saw us, he rose hastily and hurried towards us. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I'm delighted to see you both here, but allow me to ask, what brings you here? Holmes took Wolford aside and explained the situation to him. Then he returned with the inspector towards Eliza and me, gesturing for me to follow. Inspector Wolford sat down opposite Eliza Walters again, but I immediately noticed that the inspector's facial expression had changed. I followed Holmes up the stairs to the bedroom where the dead Jeremy Walters lay. 3 officers were in the midst of carrying out their work, but stopped immediately when they noticed our entrance. If I might ask you to leave Watson and myself alone with the deceased for a moment, Holmes requested. But of course, Mr. Holmes, came the prompt reply, and immediately afterwards we were alone with the dead Jeremy Walters. Jeremy Walters lay shot in his pool of blood. The revolver had fallen from his unharmed left hand onto the floor beside him. Shot to the head, Holmes stated matter-of-factly. I had to swallow hard. Only yesterday he had wanted to celebrate his birthday, and before that he had been to see me in Baker Street so terribly afraid. He had come to us for help, and we couldn't help him. Indeed, at first we didn't even seem to believe him. Did he take his own life? I asked Holmes sadly. That's the big question. Everything points to it. But Jeremy Walters was right-handed. His right hand was broken, though, so he couldn't use it. Was he even capable of firing the revolver so precisely with his left hand without the weapon jerking? I don't know. I don't believe it, but how can we prove it? Holmes seemed at a loss. Perhaps some gunshot residue on Eliza's hand or clothing, I suggested hopefully. I've already pointed that out to Inspector Wolford. He'll have the items examined, but I don't think we'll find anything. Perhaps he did do it himself? Desperation, fear, alcohol? Often a fatal combination. Holmes shook his head. Come along, Watson. There's nothing more we can do here. Together, we crept back down the few steps. Then he stopped in front of Wolford and Eliza Walters. My condolences, he said in a rather unsympathetic tone. Mrs. Walters, allow me to ask, where did your husband suddenly get this weapon from? Eliza Walters sniffled loudly and replied, The revolver was an heirloom passed down to me from my grandfather. I gave it to my husband yesterday for his birthday. You did what? I snapped at her. He had been so afraid for his life lately. I thought the revolver would make him feel secure again. I couldn't have known that he would immediately use it to shoot himself. A tear rolled down Eliza Walters's cheek. I couldn't make sense of this woman. She was so convincing. Inspector Wolford, you'll keep me informed about the investigation? Asked Holmes. But of course, Mr. Holmes. We said our goodbyes. There was nothing more we could do here. 3 days later. I was sitting with Alice and the children in the kitchen when Holmes rushed through the door and said, Come along, Watson. Get changed. We need to attend a funeral. So they've released Jeremy Walters's body, I deduced. I've just come from Inspector Wolford. The suspicion against his wife Eliza hasn't solidified and couldn't be confirmed. Third-party involvement appears to be ruled out. The body will therefore be buried today. I quickly rose from my chair when a sharp pain shot through my leg. However, I gritted my teeth and asked, How much time do I have? You should be ready by now, Watson. When we arrived at the town cemetery a short while later, the funeral service had already begun. Eliza Walters stood at the front by her husband's coffin, dressed entirely in black. Overcome with tears, she sniffled into her handkerchief. Holmes and I kept our distance and observed the scene. Come on then, Holmes, out with it. What have you discovered about Eliza Walters? Was it her or wasn't it? Eliza is completely innocent. So is Jeremy Walters. The two of them met when they were quite young. I learned from a conversation with one of her school friends, whom I traced through a yearbook in the library, that Eliza was an exceptionally intelligent girl from a poor background. All university doors were open to her. She wanted to study. She wanted to earn money. She wanted to escape poverty and become wealthy, never having to worry about making ends meet again. Then she met Jeremy. They fell in love, and he wanted to marry her. Initially, she didn't want to. Marriage would have ruined her plans after all. However, Jeremy promised her that he would study and become a lawyer or judge himself, and they would never have to live a life of worry again. Once he finished his studies, she could still pursue her own ambitions. Eliza agreed, and they married. However, Jeremy dropped out of university after just a few weeks, and Eliza and Jeremy had to take low-paying jobs to keep themselves afloat. And you think that was her motive? She couldn't forgive him for squandering the chance at a better life? Seems rather thin to me, I interrupted Holmes. I don't know, Watson, Holmes admitted honestly. That's all I have. I cannot prove it. But I don't believe in so many coincidences. And as for her giving her husband a gun as a gift, well, I hardly need comment on that. So how do you intend to proceed? I asked curiously. I will back her into a corner. Right after the funeral service, I will confront her with the fact that I have solid evidence against her. I will also tell her about the motive, which admittedly isn't very convincing. Perhaps she'll trip over her words and we can nail her down after all. It would certainly be worth a try, I said. So we waited for the end of the funeral service until Eliza Walters was finally standing alone at the grave. We approached her silently. She glared at us angrily from beneath her black veil. You again. You're too late. The funeral is already over, as you can see. We attended the burial from a distance, Holmes countered. Would you care to walk a few steps with us? Eliza Walters nodded. Why not? A short walk to stretch my legs will do me good. We walked silently side by side for a few steps before Holmes said, Eliza Walters, I accuse you of murdering your husband, Jeremy Walters. Eliza Walters stopped abruptly and began to laugh hysterically. You're accusing me! This must be some sort of bad joke. What evidence do you have, pray tell? None. You can't prove anything. In her hysteria, Eliza Walters began to laugh and cry simultaneously. She took several steps backwards. Watch out there! Someone shouted from a distance. Holmes and I looked to the right. A driverless carriage with 2 frenzied horses was charging in our direction. I called out, Eliza, look out! The carriage drew ever closer. Anxiously, I looked at Eliza Walters, tears streaming down her laughing face, which was still half hidden behind her veil. The carriage was now only a few meters from her. Eliza! I screamed, and Holmes and I ran, or rather stumbled, towards Mrs. Walters, wildly waving our arms. At the last moment, she noticed the carriage and let out a final scream. But by then, the carriage had already run over Eliza Walters. We were too late again. She died instantly. Hours later, Holmes and I sat together in our living room, each holding our 3rd glass of brandy. What a dreadful sight, I mused for the umpteenth time, while Holmes merely grunted. Tell me, Holmes, was she guilty or not? For my part, I am certain of the answer. But what about you? What do you think, Watson? I stared into the warming flames of the fireplace and pondered at length. Then I looked at my friend and merely said, Truth and death know many paths. You were listening to Charles Fraser, Death Who Knows Many Paths. The Adventures of the Elderly Sherlock Holmes. Episode 9. Based on the characters by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. A Go audio production.